Hey folks, how's it going? This is Peter Han. Welcome to my YouTube channel, and I wanted to spend a minute with you guys to go over this brand new product that I was able to receive from XPPen. For a minute, I've been very interested in looking for an alternative to various sort of hardwares and tools of the artist's trade, whether pens and papers and whatnot. So even on the digital side, I've always been interested in looking for other options as I continue to use them through the many years on a professional or personal means. Up to this point, on the digital hardware end, I've been primarily using PC. I tend to incorporate the Wacom brand for things like tablets and CinTweaks and drawing screens, which I've done so pretty much throughout most of my career. However, up to this point, I've always been very curious about, just options as to how they compare and just to see operation-wise, the ease of use or possibly qualitative elements, just the competition that's been going on. I've been aware of a lot of the other brands that have been existing in the many number of years through conventions and trade shows I would go to, and I would see their booths and whatnot. But up to this point, I've yet to actually really test out some other things. And I think, as an instructor teaching classes that are using obviously traditional means, but also that can be transferred over to the digital side, getting a little bit more insight towards how these things operate based on a more personal use, I feel like would have been a good time up to this point. So thankfully, XPPen was able to reach out to me and ask if I was actually interested in reviewing some of their products. And they had, I guess, suggested one of their items, which I thought was an interesting little piece of hardware. But I was more interested in something that I was going to be using more day to day, especially in the office, for my classes, for professional use. So here, the XPPen sent me a brand new item. This particular piece of hardware has not been released just yet. So this is, at this point, that is now that I've received the box. So I wanted to give myself a little bit of time to go through a couple of days as I set it up, see the just general feel, ergonomics, material, build, and then of course, the usability, the softwares, the drivers, and of course, just simply how the stylus and the screen work together in tandem, and if the operation is relatively smooth, if there's any sort of hiccups, and I wanted to be as insightful as I could to be able to go into it as deep as I can. Now, of course, keep in mind the fact that this is coming from a perspective from purely an artist standpoint. So when it comes to some of the technology levels of things, I can kind of read off some of the parameters and whatnot. Some of the stuff may not even make sense to me, honestly, but I wanted to more just share it as a way of kind of conveying it from artist standpoint, from an everyday use as anybody else would be going through in their own day-to-day means. Now, granted, from a professional looking into these sort of items, I would be very open to be able to purchase something like this, mainly because, of course, I could use it for my professional sort of jobs. As a student, of course, it could be a different sort of question and answer. And so I'll kind of go into it from those two perspectives, which is, if I was a student today and as a professional now, how would I potentially engage in these things? Would I even consider them? What are some of the alternatives and options of it? And maybe what's the best first step as you move into this territory that you're going to have to move into eventually at some point, which is on the digital hardware. What I want to do first is just kind of read off a little bit of the basics when it comes to this, and we'll do a slight unboxing. Once we do so, we'll transfer this hardware into my office and I'll set it up. Obviously, it's not been opened just yet. Everything's taped up and sitting in my living room for a minute. I also was able to acquire this little piece of hardware as well. Obviously, I would describe it more in a bit in the video, but this is a gaming monitor arm. And the one thing I realized was that XPPen doesn't necessarily produce a standing arm that holds the monitor or the screen for me to be able to move around and draw with as I would please. Wacom brand typically they do have an old version that I've been using for my 24-inch touch. And it's been a decent piece of hardware, and one that I feel like I now still need to retain. In terms of the XPPen monitors and other ones that are out there, they typically would be, sort of like an integrated design into the actual screen itself on the actual outer casing, which I don't mind as much. But in terms of my day-to-day use, being able to move it out of the way, the screen that is, so I can have access to things like my, top screen or the webcams or other sort of like function I want to go for as an instructor is something I kind of need to require. So I also then picked up on my own end. I pay for this one. This is a gaming monitor arm from NB Ergonomics. Like I said, I'll go into more details of some of this stuff, and I'll list out also where certain things I may have purchased online in the descriptions list. So in terms of the XPPen over here, as I kind of give you guys some basic parameters of information about what this thing is, this is actually the Artist Pro 27 Generation 2. So the 27-inch screen. Now I have the 24 Wacom, and that screen sizing has been fairly, I mean, pretty much solid in terms of what I needed. Anything smaller than that, I'm not really looking for. I think like a 20-inch screen would be way too small. The 16s that they have might be good for things like, you know, being in a sort of personal use. But as an instructor, I want a bit more real estate space. I want to be able to use that, you know, sort of like engagement in that manner. So the 27-inch was something that was very attractive to me. It sounds a little bit large, so we'll see how it kind of goes when I put it into my office. Typically, I'm using a widescreen curved monitor to the top as a secondary monitor, and the main monitor would then be the actual screen tablet, or the drawing screen essentially, as I would be using it. So I think it should still be fine. I think it's pushing it, you know, once we get to 27. I probably wouldn't want anything larger than that, honestly. I don't think any of these sort of brands, these companies that produce these sort of drawing screens should go any larger than that, unless it's supposed to be more purely for display purposes. But I think 27 is right on that threshold, in my personal opinion. So I'm excited to see how that feels and goes. And again, like I said, very rare to look for an upgrade to these drawing screens for myself. It is a 4K display. I'm just kind of reading off a little bit more here, but this is using, as they say, the X3 Pro chip technology with 16,000 pressures of level sensitivity, which again sounds amazing. We'll see what that means in terms of everyday use, and if there's any sort of delays, lags. The one key thing I probably would be being a bit mindful of is just some of the lagging of the stylus as I'm moving the cursor using things like Photoshop or other sort of drawing programs. So I'll be a bit attentive to those areas, especially when it comes to things like the pressure sensitivity. 16,000, you know, is great. And I think in the old days where like 8,000, you know, pressure sensitivity levels were nominal, you know, in those times, this should be also more than capable to give me all the sensitivity of pressure that I need. So as they're saying over here, like the feel of the screen, making it feel much more drawing like on, hopefully like paper even too. And that's also something I'm very curious as well in terms of the build quality of this thing. The actual monitor screen, typically obviously being glass, how does that actually feel to the surface? You know, I also use other sorts of hardwares like iPad Pros and using Procreate drawing programs and whatnot. And we can usually get things like drawing screen covers and protectors and stuff like that, which gives you then maybe a little bit of a textural feel, and it mimics things like the sound or the feel of a more textured surface like paper. And this, you know, being probably purely glass, we'll see how that feels. The Wacom I've used in the past have been fairly solid. It's held up pretty well. And to be honest with you, over the many years as I've used that particular product, it's sort of started to kind of like, you know, not fall apart, but there are parts that are breaking off, and, you know, the drivers can be a little bit finicky. The drawing screen does seem to have smoothed out as I'm pressing in my hand, and over the many years the oils are receiving into it. It's kind of showing its age a bit. So, you know, I'm sure the difference in feel will be pretty immediate with the upgrade of this particular item. So I'm very, again, like I said, interested in seeing how the surface will feel. If there is any sort of textural element to it, possibly, who knows? And as I said, I've never used this item or any item from XPPen and others out there up to this point. So the only comparison that I have at the moment is Wacom, which is why I'm bringing them up. And I think it's important that I acknowledge, you know, the sort of my own personal history of engagement of these sort of hardwares, and just so that you guys have context of also the things maybe that you're using to get a sense and feel of. So we'll open this up, we'll go straight into it, set it up, and we'll see how it goes. So let's do the unboxing now for this particular item. It's pretty heavy. So this will be my first look at the actual packaging as well too. And there we go. Looks pretty nice, you know, in terms of just a first impression. It gives you all the information I just kind of talked about in the intro. Just to get the feel. There's the actual image of the back end of the drawing screen. You can see what I was talking about with the integrated design of the actual stand. And I'm going to lay this down. So first things out of the box does give us the calibration factory report. It's kind of cool. So color calibration display, and it kind of tells us all the parameters, the basics of what it needs to be able to hit within those colors are hitting on the screen itself. So interesting to be able to see that. Something like this, never really seen. 4 monitors. See, here is the display itself. You can kind of get a sense already in terms of how big it's going to be. Nothing underneath the actual foam. Multi-levels within this. It's got the typical stuff like the warranty card, the actual pamphlets. I'm sure it goes into details about operation, function. Extra box here. This seems to be the actual remote. So stuff like this, usually I actually would not use as much. I tend to actually go for the Razer brand and using their things like the Tartarus and the little hand keys for gaming. But here is the actual item for that. Pretty thin. Looks pretty good. It's got an actual rotating dial. No clicking on this on the actual dial itself. Center portion does click. Center portion does click. This rotates. And the several buttons, which I'm sure you can actually then allocate to hotkeys. It's got an on and off button, and it does have a USB-C port. So this might be something you have to actually hardwire constantly into the actual display screen, but we'll see. We have our typical HDMI, USB-C, power cable. And I believe this is the actual stylus pen. So up to this point, I have not held a stylus pen from a different brand. So here's the interior of what it looks like. It's pretty nice packaging. And I have 2 pens in this, a thinner one and a slightly thicker one. Now, I still don't understand the actual functionality of this in terms of how we use it. I'm assuming this means that we have use of either pen based on our preference. The slightly thicker diameter one, I'm assuming would be the one that is more comparable to the Wacom Stylus as well. So general feel, length, right from the get-go, has slight similarity to it. I would say it's almost maybe even slightly thinner. The actual texture rubber is smooth. And I'm sure that may begin to start to, I'm not sure if it'll roughen up, but more than likely it'll get slicker, if anything. The front click, right click, or front and back click are there. Easy access to it. The rear button, which honestly I'd never use, the eraser portion of it. And of course they have different nibs. And we'll take a look at that in detail later on based on, we have plastic ones it seems like, and we do seem to have more of a textured nib as well too. It does have an actual USB connector. I'm assuming this might be a traveling one. I'm not quite sure just yet. I'll have to read the actual description of it and I'll get into that. It does seem like it has extra clicky button in case you lose it. And it seems to have an extractor for the nib inside the case. Pretty nicely packaged design. Lightweight, has a slight concave to the surface, which I assume you can then place the pen on top of this. Wouldn't roll away anywhere. I'm really interested in things like product design, industrial levels of, sort of design work that goes into this, materials to ergonomics and whatnot. So this sort of stuff, really kind of, for the customer, as an artist and professional, pulling a lot of stuff out and then the immediate sort of like feel and how the kind of the relationship you'll get with the product that you get, having that immersion feel to it, like it really wants to bring you in and you want to kind of look at more and see more and discover more. I like that sort of feeling. And you get a lot of things like phone cases, and not phone cases, but phones that are sent out in packages, and you open them up and they're all like in these little paper boxes and stuff like that. And honestly, I get the cost saving and of course things like sustainability, and that's great. But there is also when you're having something that's a bit more developed, processed in terms of design thinking, that the appreciation for this is quite nice. So I'm actually quite a fan of how this feels right off the bat. And again, the fact that this seems like I can actually use it immediately. It's not something I'll like take out the pen, put it on a stand, and put this away and forget about it. It's going to be on my table and actually put the pen on top of this and it won't roll away. I like the immediate sort of like understanding of that. The design language is clear. Other cables, and part of the actual, power. Extra plastic bits, which I'm sure will probably fit into these things for wire sort of like organization and whatnot. So that's the entirety of the box. There's nothing else that's in there. Nothing way too fancy. It is, kind of nicely put together. But like I said, I'm more curious now about the actual screen itself. So I'm going to bring this back in. So on the back side, you'll have a little tab here, which you can then pull to be able to extend and control the actual stand itself. Seems like it extends pretty far off. So you get a much nicer angle to be able to draw on. So obviously you can shift it around, but on the actual monitor itself, or the stand itself, I don't think it rotates. So on the stand itself, it's directly onto a table. It's pretty steady. It's not going to necessarily slide around because of the textured rubber underneath. It's got rubber underneath the actual stand, and it's got rubber grips underneath the actual monitor as well too. So that's going to keep it relatively stable, but also resisting any sort of movement if you put pressure on it. So if I'm actually then sitting on this, drawing on top of that, putting any sort of force on this, is not going to necessarily have it slip out somewhere. Typically for me, like I said, I'm not really going to be using stands like this that often. We'll see if, I think you should be able to, this is something, yeah, it's basically screwed on by Phillips head screws right into the back of that, here, 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 and here. That should be easily able to be taken off, which I then be able to place in the actual arm connector to this as a mount. To the rear side, this is where all the cable connectors, yeah, that's the organizer, the cover for it. So you can organize your cables back here, put the cover on top of it, keep it clean. And so this should be good. Weight-wise, you're looking at about maybe 20, 25 pounds, something like that. So weight is decent, not too bad. The arm that I got should be able to hold that fairly, effectively. But so far from the immediate impression, let's actually look at the glass. Now, of course, on the actual camera, the lights that I have inside the garage here should, give you a sense of the way the surface reflects light sources. One of the problems of the Wacom screen CinTweak that I have is that it is a bit more reflective to surfaces now. So lights that are up ahead and whatnot, I can see the light gleam pretty strongly. The office room that I have is primarily a singular light on the ceiling, and I do have other stand lights to the side. So we'll see how much of it reflects, but right now this is based on having a window right there, having 3 lights above here, 3 lights back there, and 2 additional or several spotlights above. And I'm not necessarily seeing a very strong glare right off of it, so it's not distracting me at any point. A lot of times I like to kind of just run my hands across the surface of it just to see if there's any sort of, nick or unevenness, texture to some degree. And it's really, really smooth. The edge of the plastic has a slight raise to it, but it's not going to necessarily hinder, I would say, too much. It would be kind of nice to see future builds where this glass goes all the way to the edge, where there's no actual plastic ridge on this. So then you don't necessarily have any sort of obstruction of flow or catching. Because I can imagine now if I take the pen, let's take this bad boy out again. What I want to do is without any, sort of hookups just yet, just to feel the surface of it. And I like to listen to it, feel it. And it's smooth, and obviously as it should be. But this is kind of what I'm talking about. Obviously the actual monitor ends here. It is about maybe maybe an inch and a half, maybe one, inch and a half, I would say, of a border around this. So of course, your pen's not going to go extended all the way to the edge of this to be able to hit that. It would be amazing at some point in the future to be able to see monitors like this that have the full real estate to the very edge of the actual frame. That would be kind of stunning. I don't know if that would be even possible, but that would be really cool to see. So what it means is we have a border here, and it makes it look like a picture frame, as you would have on televisions and other monitors as well too. But the one beauty of having a screen that is full to the edge is it just feels like it's much more of a grander sort of space on the surface to draw on, yet not necessarily maybe like making it larger, right? We can see a clear use of the logo and the brand. Don't mind it. I wouldn't mind having this maybe like lowered a little bit, or even if it could be illuminated underneath. We'll see if that happens or not. So that way when you like turn it off, maybe it's not there. When you turn it on, it kind of glows a little bit. Or we can maybe reposition it slightly differently. Sometimes branding names it are a little bit distracting to me. That's just my personal taste on things. But either way, it is what it is. You start to see when I start drawing, or moving that is, how much of my arm movement really goes into this. So even if I'm drawing on, let's say a class demo or something like that, the amount of movement I'll be going for is really within a certain amount of space within and being able to transition and move things around. It doesn't seem it's going to be unwieldy just yet. It is large. I'm not going to lie about that, right? It can be heavy. Not going to lie about that either. But in terms of what I'm going to be able to do with it, and also what I have used before, it's not that much of a increase in some of those areas that make it unwieldy or difficult to use. So now we did an unboxing. We've seen the stylus, we've seen the monitor, we've felt kind of how it just generally feels. Initial impression is it feels high quality. I'm a little bit worried about the plastic edge of this, just a little bit. Mainly because over time, I feel like stuff like this can catch on things. And as it catches, as you pull it from a certain direction, or just based on over time, as the plastic slightly ages and degrades, chipping, cracking, breaking is a possibility. Because that is what has happened to my Wacom. The CinTweak 24 is at the edges of these areas, right in the bottom on this part where I have it, is where it has broken off. So the plastic there is actually exposed, creating sharp edges and stuff like this. So not necessarily ideal and can be a little bit dangerous. So everything else looks pretty good so far. Power button, everything is up here. Everything button-wise, clickiness, feels good, tactile. The color of it is not pure black. It does have like almost gunmetal feel to it. So it's got a slight sparkly paint job on the back end. There's a little bit of residue of glue on this, which I'll wipe off later. Fingerprint. Right, just seeing if any fingerprint leftovers are put on it. Over time, with the Wacom under a certain light, you'll see all the smearing and the oil from the hand. So you have to kind of like wipe the screen off and stuff like that. But this has a very semi-matte sort of surface to it, and it's not picking up the oil at all, really. So you see slight smudges here and there, but it's so negligible. And I'm sure, of course, you're gonna have to wipe it off once in a while in use. And then, as I said, in time, we're talking about maybe 5 years down the line, as this screen, the glass begins to, pick up the oils and begins to smooth out a little bit, might become a little bit more reflective, might receive a bit more of the oil on top of the surface. We'll see, but that's going to be a long-term sort of like, point in which we'll have to look at that. At that point, of course, some of you may upgrade, get something else. For myself, I'm pretty much, when I get something as a product, I tend to stick with it for a long time just to really, get as much as I can out of the thing. Either way, let's go hook it up, put on the actual, office room, talk a little bit more details about things like pricing, and if it's something that's relatively approachable for, everybody. Okay. Okay, hey folks, how's it going? We're now in the office. It's the following day. It took a minute to kind of problem solve a little bit of the installation of the XPPen 27-inch Artist Pro into my spatial area for work. There were a couple things I was trying to figure out in terms of the actual attachment of the monitor to the arm that I had received and bought. Just as a reminder, what I had purchased was this NB Ergonomics. This is the gaming monitor arm. This is the Model L70. This is not necessarily a review on the arm itself, but I did want to show, what product I am using in combination to the actual drawing screen itself. So the space that I have here right now, as I'll also kind of show you a little bit more detailed tour, is, just the working station where I do a lot of my classwork, professional jobs. This room that I have currently is more of an actual legitimate working studio. So, a lot of things that are more personal sketches, that sort of stuff, I may do in here once in a while, but most of the time I'm kind of outside in the living room or the kitchen kind of drawing a little bit. So whenever I'm in this actual studio space, I know that I'm coming in here to work for the actual kind of primary jobs that I operate in. So of course, the XPPen has now overtaken the display monitor, or the CinTweak that I had beforehand, and it was attached in the same area. So as you can now see, we have the XPPen over here. We're able to kind of move it around a little bit. And you can see on this side, we have the actual attachment arm. Beforehand, the CinTweak drawing screen was actually attached to this table, which is a lifting, electronic table that rises and drops. But I didn't attach it to it this time, mainly because at the arm that I bought, the NB Ergonomic, the way it settles actually lifts this arm a little bit too high, so I'm unable to actually drop it down lower. So there was one of the main problems about using this arm in conjunction with this one. I did a good amount of research to find maybe various arms out there through Amazon, and this one seemed to give us the best angle of shift. Now this is about the maximum that I have. I can actually lift it up a little bit more, but it drops back down to this position. This is mainly for actual monitor to be able to watch, or to use as a way for general computer use, gaming and watching films or whatever the case is. So I can, of course, bring it up a little bit higher, bring it up into a vertical sort of positioning. So it's nice for that, but as I'm drawing, obviously I want there to be a bit of a tilt. And most of the drawing arms that I've kind of found typically go at about between 25 to 40 degree angles. This is about a 50-degree angle is what I've seen. So it's nice to be able to actually take it to that level. You can hear the click of it, take it to that position, and it stays in that position pretty well. The actual remote, I'll kind of go into the attachment piece over here as I keep playing with this. We do have the remote right here. This is the XPPen remote that I have, which I have been playing with and testing. We'll go into the software just a little bit in detail to kind of show you guys what I'm seeing. But so far as I've replaced this with my Razer sort of like accessory for, hotkeys on Photoshop and whatnot, it's been relatively decent. You can connect this with Bluetooth, wireless. You can connect it with a dongle, which is attached to my computer right now. I didn't want to, sort of like mess with the Bluetooth thing at the moment. Didn't feel like problem solving it. So I just put the dongle into the computer, automatic connection. It was really quick. And then of course you can do a direct wire connection with the USB-C. Now what I have over here is actually something that I found as a custom order that was on Etsy, I believe. I'll give some information about some of the stuff that's attached into the description. Like I said, other things on the video feed. But for the moment, this is something that's a tray which attaches through felt and stickies to the side of the drawing screen, and it's all customizable in terms of attachment. And you just attach felt little pads underneath this, and this is then the velcro, which you can just simply attach, and it sticks and it won't go anywhere, and you have to obviously pull it off. So it's actually quite convenient, and it's something I actually use for my other drawing screen. Then I figured I would just transfer it over to the XPPen, and it seems to work just fine. So this is going to stay there for the time being, and all the buttons and the dials I've been now sort of allocated to the normal hotkeys in my Photoshop. I will say there are enough keys. I kind of wish there were a few, for example, like on the side, possibly. They're mostly front facing, and of course even in the software you can orient it to a horizontal to vertical, which is pretty cool. The dial works pretty nicely, but I wish there was a little bit more tactileness to this. And the center button is fine for the switching options to things like scroll, to brush size, to zoom. And then the actual buttons themselves are nice and tactile and large, so it's easy to feel your way through. However, again, I wish there were a few additional buttons around that we could maybe have had to click on to the sides like this, maybe instead of only the front face, but even just to the side of it. It would have been also really interesting to see if there was like a modular system, if there were additional ports, let's say like USB-C ports, and you wanted to get like an additional attachment to the remote that has extra buttons or something like that. That also would have been very interesting to have, because if I want more, sort of options of keys, it's like this is now going to potentially take over, my other sort of accessory from Razer. So I would like to be able to maybe, do more stuff to create more efficiency to use on the remote. But anyways, in terms of coming out of the box, it does work well, and it does give me the nice proper options. First reaction of the screen itself is that it is nice and bright. You can adjust everything in terms of brightness, saturations, the temperatures and stuff like this directly into the software. So the software was just downloaded directly. You can get it off of their website, XPPen.com. And everything seems to work pretty smoothly. We'll go, like I said, into the details of certain things I wish there was better labeled within the software itself. But the hardware, I think, right off the bat, it looks great. The screen feels smooth, and I've been using it again for the class. And the one thing I will say is sometimes people worry about this a little bit with drawing screens, is the heat. So is it really warm? I would say generally the heat is only in a singular couple different spots, and it seems to be relocated to like this lower right hand corner. I'm not exactly sure why. It might be because there's maybe some of the processor, that sort of stuff on there. But anywhere else, I would say it's relatively cool. Most of it is actually nice and cool to the touch. So of course, if it's really hot, it can generate, the stickiness on the hand. Maybe you get sweaty hands and stuff like that. I have more drier hands, so I'm able to slide along it fairly well, but still it would be uncomfortable for some people if it was too warm. And I think that's sometimes a deal breaker for some individuals. For me though, it's not too bad, but like I said, it's a tad bit warm on this end, but not to the point where it's too terrible for me. To the rear of it is where you will find the connectors to the actual HDMI port, the display port. It has a USB-C port, and it has obviously the power port as well too. The one sort of thing I wish this particular monitor, and maybe it's just XPPen in general, and I would say this is probably one of the biggest gripes for this product, because everything else so far up to this point has been pretty solid. I'll do some drawing demos here and there as well too. But I would say the main issue is there are no extra ports along the side. We have a power button up here. We have the touch sensitive button up here, so we can turn off the touch sensitivity on and off. I actually usually keep it off because I don't use the touch functions as much. If you do, great, but for myself when I'm drawing, sometimes it kind of picks up my movements. I'm not really looking for that, so I usually turn it off. So the other keys and buttons are up here as well. Again, nice and tactile. And you can kind of pick and choose the different sort of options of ports and connections that might go to, like, let's say, a different connection, whatever the case is. So that's nice. And again, the power button's up here, but there's nothing else for me to connect to. No USB-C, no USB-A or B. And so if I wanted to attach a different accessory, I'm not able to do so. And that was one of the benefits that I had with the Razer on the Wacom CinTweak, is that I had it attached here and was directly connected to my CinTweak. And so that way I didn't have to use other ports on the computer or the extenders that I have in the back. So having extra ports is something I always look for and kind of always mindful of, and stuff that I really appreciate to have inside something like this. However, again, is it a complete deal breaker? Not necessarily. If I'm smart about what I'm putting into my USB sort of ports in the back of the computer to my extenders, I should have plenty. For myself, I tend to fill up quite many because I have so many external hard drives and accessories and stuff like that. But the remote itself was one of the big questions that I had, because if I didn't like this and I wanted to use the Razer, then I'm kind of stuck because there's no port for me to attach it to. And that would have been a bit of a bigger gripe in my situation. But however, I'm not too negative on this remote. I'm actually quite fond of it. The other remote that I have, and this is from the Wacom tablet, the CinTweak that is, I'm sorry. This is the one that, of course, I was sent, through that use of that particular hardware, and I was never fond of this. The reason why I wasn't fond of it was because, unlike the XPPen, this has a rotating dial. So I can do things like, zooming in, zooming out, brush size, all that sort of stuff. It doesn't exist on the remote from the Wacom. There are, a good amount of buttons, but I felt like it was so sort of like smooth and aligned to the surface. It was really hard to get a sense of like where the buttons were. Where these are more independent and raised, so it's a little bit more easy to feel out where things are. And these were a lot more shallow of a button to click, where these have a little bit more depth and more of a response to it. So I think the remote from XPPen actually is more successful. There is another downside though, unfortunately. The XPPen, I've had to resort to using this tray because it doesn't attach anywhere on the screen. The one thing that was quite interesting with the Wacom remote is that you can actually apply it to the surface and it will stick there like a magnet. Now, it wasn't the strongest, and it was kind of okay, but it was an option, So having something like that on the actual XPPen would have been nice, or even some additional sort of accessory that you can clip on to the top or something like that would have been also plenty. It wouldn't require, a drastic design change or anything a heavy cost point, but if it literally was just a little clip that goes into the top of it, I see a couple of openings up here, if it's whether sitting up here or to the side, that I think would have been a really nice addition to the remote. So again, a little bit of a criticism, not a deal breaker, not a huge fan of the Wacom remote, do like the XPPen No one, so I do recommend it. It's nice that it comes with it. And I think it's a pretty solid, sort of item for that. So of course, we do have the actual Stylus casing again, as we saw in the intro. And yes, we do have the two models of pens. And as I read through a little bit more in detail, we do have the two styluses, and you have the option of using both. And in the software, you're able to then, sort of like control the pressures and the button allocation and whatnot. For me, I still kind of prefer a bit more the thicker, denser pen, honestly, because it just gives you a little bit more to grip on. The thinner one is not too bad. It's nice and lightweight, but I feel like my hand would tend to cramp a little bit if your hands are bigger, not really getting able to kind of feel out, but it's also very smooth. There's no rubber on it onto the side, and this one has a little bit more tactile, sort of material, so it's easier in the hand. It doesn't really slip out. So again, I think for travel purposes, something like that would be quite nice. But even if I was traveling, I would just simply resort to just using the standard one. I am glad to see that they do include the slim. And I'm sure people that might have smaller hands or just general preferences of grip may turn to this one. But, again, it's packaged together and fits nicely inside. Now, inside the actual casing, as sort of like what I talked about in the intro, there is a little sort of tab here which you can pull out the nib, and there are a series of nib options, the plastic ones, and one that's a little bit more softer heads. And I think I switched it out to that, the light gray one, and it feels a lot better to the surface of the glass, where the native natural sort of pen nib they can't give you is harder plastic. So it's nice because it retains the sharpness, but also the form of the nib a lot longer. But I like the softer nib a bit more because, again, same thing. It's a bit easier on the movement. It feels more natural and feels drawing-like on materials, traditional, on the surface of the glass. And of course, there actually is a little hole for you to stick the pen in to have it as a stand, which is fine. But honestly, the way I'm going to be using it is just simply sitting it as a tray. What I'd like to be able to do is kind of talk a bit more about the actual software. We'll kind of go into some of the details of the driver, just look at some of the windows and options within that, and see how it goes. From there, we'll try some other things based on like demos and show you more directly with the use of the tool set, and kind of give you more information now based on then, of course, from a standpoint as an artist. And we talked about this at the very beginning, is if I was a student as to also then as a professional, how would I approach a product like this, and would I consider actually getting one? And what are my other options within that, right? So let's go into the computer a little bit and look at the actual software up close, and we'll see how, take a look. Okay, so here we are in front of the computer, and switching a bit of the view so you can kind of see again where my sort of projected view of the actual XPPen Artist Pro is. And we have a couple things to take a look at on the actual screen itself. You know, I'm just using Photoshop at the moment, and I do have the XPPen driver software up here. The window's, you know, somewhat, well, you can move it around, but it's locked in terms of sizing, so I can't really expand it or contract it, which is fine. Just giving you guys certain details about, if you've used drivers from XPPen, you're probably familiar with it. This is really my first time. Yesterday I kind of started playing with it, but really kind of like, you know, taking a look at it in detail. Like I said, I kind of assigned a lot of my keys already to this, so you can actually go to the upper left and select out which sort of product or hardware you're actually working with. So right now it's on the shortcut remote. You can see the battery full percent. It does allow us to do simple rotations, so you can do the, you know, 90 to 180 upside down, the sort of default essentially. I have it set to a 90-degree angle. In terms of how it's set up onto the actual sort of display, that's kind of what it's doing right now. Here you can see that you can actually highlight the individual sort of keys, and as you do so, you know, you can then choose what options you may want to go for. For the roller dial, you can be choosing it to brush size, zoom, or whatever the case is. You can disable it, you can customize it, you can attach it to certain keys, I believe, if you like to. So if you customize, go to it, you can actually add special buttons. So it's pretty, you know, nice to have that. Mine is typically left to the brush sizing. I usually may want to, actually I'll do that right now. I'm going to disable rotate, and I'm going to disable the scroll. I'll probably keep it to, well, I'll keep it brush size. I'll keep zoom on there for the time being, but I do also have the keys attached where I have brushes, eraser, my control Z's on there, my shift key, the F tab, which I can then kind of drop in and out of the window on Photoshop. I'll have my control plus and minus, which I can zoom in and out, so I'll use those key buttons to do so. My space buttons at the bottom, I have V for the actual arrow key, and then of course the paint bucket tool. And that's just general stuff I like to use, and I'll switch them out, you know, if I need to kind of feel out a better sort of option. Here we can go to the actual gear, and that'll give us, you know, sort of different sort of configuration. You can import, export, some diagnostic tools, and, you know, the various options in terms of the tool set itself. It's pretty basic. There's not that much more depth to it, which is appropriate. You can kind of see it doesn't necessarily like explain to you, you know, some of the actual options here. This is set to option 1. I'm assuming this is in different profiles. You can kind of see on the bottom it actually highlights a little notification right there. Current key group is disabled. This is a current key. So I'm assuming key groups are profiles. You can actually assign different sort of keys to it. But it doesn't actually, like, if you hold the cursor on there, I would imagine you can like have it highlight like a little, you know, dialogue or information that kind of tells you maybe what that's for. So that would have been nice. As you'll notice, this thing at the bottom, which kind of pops up as a notification, I kind of wish that could be turned off from the driver. Here, I believe these are the same thing. Like, there's a plus and a minus, but I'm not really quite sure what these are for. So if I press plus, it seems like you can attach it to a certain application or a certain program, I believe. So if you have, again, kind of like a profile. So not really quite sure, I mean, what the difference between the two are. There's no, you know, sort of like informational packet about the driver software. I'm sure there must maybe one on the actual website possibly, and actually what I do have is the XPPen website up. Let me do a quick search on that real briefly, just to see if that exists, because if you just go to the drivers page, you know, this is where you can then download the individual drivers for them, but at the same time it doesn't seem like I see any sort of like pamphlet talking about the actual use of the driver. So here, manual download, driver download, driving software, but I'm not seeing anything in terms of information about the different options, what they are. So you kind of have to play with it. Again, I may be just missing it, so I apologize if everyone here is like, no, you know, there's a download manuscript or some kind of directional instructional somewhere else. I'm not really seeing it right now, so apologies about that. So correct me in the comments if I am wrong. So anyways, but again, it's not that deep, right? If you do go to the actual Artist Pro 27, this is Generation 2 as it says, it does bring up the actual preview of this, and you can actually then kind of click on some options and get a sense of, like, you can show the actual floating menus and stuff like that. You can turn it off. Those I usually have off. This is the working area in terms of, like, you know, where the actual screen setup, where you kind of want to keep it is. You can customize that as well too. Display settings, you can mess with things like brightness. I actually brought it up a little bit. This is at 60 right now, default's at 50, contrast, all that sort of stuff. You can do the HDR on, off. I keep it off. You can also do color space, so I have it on user base at the moment, and so my color temperature is at 6500. The default usually sets to about 5000. It's a little bit too warm for me, I will say, so I think 6500 for myself I actually prefer. You can also then choose different sort of color profiles. And this is where you kind of play with the options and see which one you like the most. Beyond that, we do have the actual pen stylus sort of options as to choose. You can see it's on the X3 Pro at the moment. This is the X3 Pro Slim, and so you can choose either one of those to be able to actually customize and what you want to do. All the little individual buttons and such can be then adjusted. Mine's on right click for the back button, and it's also then left alt for the front. So the right click is then to bring up my brushes, and the front left alt is to bring up the eyedropper tool. Like I said, I don't really play with the eraser, so I don't really play with that. It's on pressure, it's on tilt, Windows ink. If you turn that off, it loses the pressure sensitivity from the Windows sort of, dialog. Here you can mess with the level of pressure sensitivity, and right now mine's a little bit higher. It was at default. Obviously, this is normal default. I found it to be a little bit too, not as sensitive as I wanted. So when I do things like handwriting or certain drawing of line, it almost felt like it was assisting the line work, and I'm not a big fan of that, so I want there to be more of a direct natural feel, of course, so I bumped up this pressure sensitivity higher, and that seems to work fairly well. I'm going to keep it right around that range, but you can control all these tabs. And same thing over here, I actually don't know what these tabs mean, so I kind of wish if I hovered around the top of this tab, like what it actually meant. So again, it's like you can actually do the preset versions, obviously, right? But at the same time, if it just kind of gave me a little bit of information, that would have been nice to have. This is the little sort of canvas. You can actually draw and test it and play with it. You can then see the pressure sensitivity levels, heavier, lighter, whatever the case is. You can clear it up. So again, works really well. It's nice and smooth. The gear kind of gives us the same sort of things, the diagnostic tools and configurations and stuff like that. And that's pretty much it. There's not much else in the actual software driver for any other customization, and really there's not much else I kind of need at this point. As long as it's stable, it doesn't drop out, doesn't seem to just disconnect the actual XPPen randomly while I'm working on it, is ideal. And so as long as it stays steady, then I'm pretty good with this. So we'll keep this here for the time being, and we'll just go directly to Photoshop. So you can kind of see where I have now the monitor screen right in front of me. I'm just using a standard brush from Photoshop itself, and you can kind of see how I'm able to kind of adjust the brush sizing itself. But then at the bottom, you'll notice again, it does give you the notification as to what button you're pushing. I don't mind that, because if I'm lost in some of the keys and I'm pressing it, it's like, oh, that's the shift key. Oh, that's the F key. So I'm able to kind of remind myself like what those buttons are. So that's kind of nice. However, at the same time, I wish there was a way to disable that. There might be, not really quite sure where that is. So in the software, I didn't see any options as to like maybe how to adjust that part. It might have been in the floating menu option, possibly, but didn't really look too much deeper into it. But for the moment, it doesn't seem intuitive on that part about showing me where that was. In any case, the screen itself is nice and smooth. And to give you guys a little bit more sort of like details about the monitor itself, as we talked about, this is a 4K monitor. So as 4K, we're talking about 120 hertz refresh as well too, which is great. And so I'm going to bring in the actual website to give you guys a little bit of comparisons of certain things as well too. But basically, that's some of the main pro features. It's a high refresh. It's beautiful sort of screen. Resolution is crisp and sharp. Screen is smooth. Draws really well. As I said, kind of you can feel just the slick. It's not slick as in like ice skatey slick. It has a little bit of a sort of tactileness to this with this softer nib, and it feels really nice. Now again, granted, it's a fresh brand new product as a glass, and as I'm moving along the surface, maybe it'll absorb some of the ink. Now there is some interesting stuff. I mean, here's some extra little bits and pieces of things that it came with in the box. It does have our just a little cloth to be able to wipe the screen down, which honestly is great. I like a nice cloth. It does come with an actual glove, and typically these sort of things I don't really use. However, it's also because I've never had one. So I was a little bit curious. I didn't actually bust it out and play with it just because, I wanted to wait a little bit. So here's the glove itself, and it seems like it attaches to then, of course, your pinky to your ring finger, and so then your index finger, your thumb, everything is exposed. There's an extra bit of padding at the edge for your hand. So we'll put this on, we'll see how well it fits. Of course, for people that have much bigger hands, we'll see how it goes. It seems to be quite stretchy, like neoprene material. So I don't think it'll be any problems of fitting hands. So as you can see, we have the glove on now. So it seems to actually be a perfect length for me. I don't think there's any other option for sizing and whatnot, but this is pretty much exact to my hand. No other give. I'm sure there'll be more stretchiness if other people put it on. And so you would be able to slide along this and have any sort of oil, you know, sort of like residue going on top of the surface and keeping it clean as well. So I think this will be a nice option for some people. Also safeguards you from the heat a little bit if there's something that bothers you on that part. As I said, typically these sort of things I don't really use most day to day, but it is nice that they included that option. So keep it just in case I ever want to turn to it. As I said, you know, of course, we do have the quick guide that kind of gave me the information about the install, and everything was pretty clear, nothing too complex. The amount of wires is pretty basic, just power cable. It's the USB-C, and of course my HDMI. The display port is what I'm using actually, not the HDMI. But yeah, so you know, other than that, everything seems to draw perfectly well. And as I go on top of this, we can maybe even sketch something out real fast just to kind of play with this. Preferably maybe even some kind of creature, animal sort of thing, kind of see how well it moves with my hand and speed. Now as I start to draw with it, things that start to stand out as things I want to pay attention to, mindful of, not necessarily any sort of problems just yet. I am paying attention to, as I move the actual stylus, how much sort of lag and catch up the cursor does. Now of course on the surface of the monitor here, the camera is not set up, so you're just watching a direct feed of the actual desktop, so you're not gonna be able to see what I'm seeing. So I'll move the camera over in a bit just to kind of catch that a bit more. But right now as I move my line, the cursor always trails back just ever so much, about that much distance from the tip of the pen to the cursor. So it's going to be in contact here, and as I move, it's going to trail and track that, which for some people who have used these sort of things are now used to it. For a lot of people who have never used CinTweaks and drawing screens, will probably find that to be a little bit odd. And also hard to work with, because of the fact that you have to almost feel like you're not watching your stylus, but watching the cursor moving behind it, essentially. Is kind of what's going on. But it's almost, for me, a combination where I'm looking at both. I'm able to keep track of both things, where the stylus is going and where the cursor is following. Would it be good to have it like directly one-to-one, and would it feel different? Not sure. I would say this is where things like the iPad Pro is more direct to that, because you don't have a cursor. Where you're touching the pen and where you draw is the mark that you make. So it's a more instantaneous sort of line, which is closer, I would say, to the traditional sort of mediums that we would get. However, is it a bothersome thing? Not necessarily, but it's also because if you're moving really fast, the cursor may be doing that. But in these sort of shorter movements, you're not going to see any sort of lag within it. And it seems to be fine in terms of just the visibility. Some people, like I said, tend to get a bit lost on that part, because trying to keep track of things that are moving of the hand to the actual cursor is not a normalized sort of visual thing that you would do in drawing and sketching. So there's going to be always a bit of a learning curve when it comes to using these sort of hardwares. I will say using tablets, the actual drawing tablets where you're looking at the screen instead, is a bit higher of a learning curve, due to the fact that you have to look up and draw and paint instead of looking down at your actual screen or your surface. But like I said, anything with a bit of time can be picked up, and it'll be normalized to the use. But so far, like I said, no real big issues in terms of just the feel. And as you get this sort of like monstrous creature fish going in there, things are smooth, as I said. No real hiccups. Haven't really felt any hiccups for any sort of products like this in the past in terms of speed, but the refresh rate obviously is really good. And the resolution helps a lot. Like I said, things are nice and bright, but it's not way too strong. There are strong lights right above ahead of me. There's a ceiling light right over here too. From the angle where it's shining on, this is where a strong reflection is over here, but it's not really shining intensively, so it's not kind of hurting my eyes. or necessarily distracting in terms of, you know, these sort of light sources. So the screen seems to be soft enough in a good way where the eyes don't seem to strain as I'm looking at the surface of it. Kind of inspired by the oarfish making up this underwater aquatic creature. So again, draws well, really like it so far. I actually haven't popped in the slim version yet. While we're here, I might as well just kind of play with it slightly. Here's the slim version. So it automatically clicks over to it. This is on a different pressure sensitivity. So it requires just a bit more harder press to get the line that I want. But actually it's not too bad. I haven't actually used this one, the slim version. Let's actually bring up the driver again real quickly. What I like is that the driver is also pretty immediate in terms of its, you know, direct sort of response. Let's bring it back up to where I had it normally. Sometimes like you have to restart the computer for some of the application or the settings to apply. But this one you don't need to restart, it just goes directly into it. Feels better. Like I said, I think a higher sensitivity is something that I would recommend. It's not bad, the slim. Initially I was a little bit worried about like, it's not much grip on there, it's really thin, but I actually kind of like it. This is my first time using the slim. I primarily use this one. I assumed this one would have been the one I would go to because I was so used to the Wacom Stylus. And the Wacom Stylus over here, kind of in comparison, you know, it's a fairly equal design and dimension in terms of diameter, in terms of button placement. It's pretty much almost one-to-one. But the slim, that's surprising actually. This one, again, right here in the moment as we're doing some of the reviews and drawing, I'm a little bit taken aback on like, actually this is quite nice. I may have to stick with this going into my future use of this particular product now, into my classes and daily use. What I like about it is it just feels like you don't really feel it in your hand as much. Granted, yeah, of course it's thin, it's slim. It's not just a weight issue. It's the fact that it doesn't feel like you have to hold on and grip it to really move it. I can just float it into my hand, and I can let it glide. It actually feels less straining. I don't know what it is, maybe with these tools, because I have that texture, there's a bit more diameter, and because there's more, you know, sort of like material, I feel like my grip wants to get a little bit tighter with this one. But I like the way this one feels in the hand. Okay, well, again, right in the moment, just kind of a spur on the spot, using this product for the first time on this end, I'm a little bit more surprised on how nice this really feels. Nice surprise. Nice job, XPPen. This is a good one right here. I like this. I've used a slim pen from Wacom on the other sort of products, like the the mobile carry ones and whatnot, and they were okay, but they were very limiting because the button options were minimal. It was like one button option, if anything else. But this one, you know, has a double. It doesn't have the eraser option on it, but like I said, it feels pretty good. If I replace a nib on this, it might feel even better. Okay, so what I wanted to do was actually even bring in the kind of the price point and talk about that slightly, and give you guys an idea of like, you know, is this an actual option to consider as an actual thing to maybe buy? So what I want to do first is kind of introduce the website that goes into a lot of the stores that shows you, you know, the various products that XPPen offers. As I've said, I haven't really used any of the other ones in the past, but we do have these here, and it shows you again the range of cost for this sort of like line of product, which is the Artist Pro drawing screens. And we will call it basically the pen displays, right? So we have a pen display, we have a pad series, Artist series, we have Artist Pro series, we have the Magic Drawing Pad, which I believe is also just like a little mobile carrying thing, kind of like the competitor to the iPad Pro. Haven't used it before. The Artist Ultra 16 seems to be a smaller 4K version of what we have here with the 27, so easier for carry, that sort of stuff. And then we have obviously the pen displays in Pro Series. So let's go to the Pro Series at the moment. And let's give you the general idea of the price, okay? Because now the question of, as a student or as a professional, if I look at sort of this stuff, you know, what are my options and what would I do? You know, would I purchase something like this? Now the first answer, based on, of course, as a professional, is yes. I need this sort of item for my daily use, whether for my classes, for professional work, whatever the case is. So I'm going to purchase one or acquire one in some way or manner. For the moment, earlier on, it was all Wacom product for the time being. I've known of XPPen, I've known of, you know, the other ones out there. So here with the XPPen, the price point, we can kind of see there actually are early bird and also things like discounts available right now. This starts off with the sort of like the larger screen. It kind of goes down to the smallest ones on the bottom. These are all the Pro lines. And so here, I think the comparable one to the one I was using prior is the 24-inch, right, the 4K model. And this starts right now with a discount at $1,039.99. The 27-inch for this particular model that's coming out, and it's supposed to be releasing again this March. The launch date is the 21st. Is coming out at $18.99. Okay, so there's a early bird special sale as well too for the online campaign, and the price will go down to $16.99 for the early bird special. So it's interesting because, you know, we're talking about maybe about a $700 or less increase from the 24-inch model. So you're looking at under, you know, $2K, under $2,000 for this. Now this is at the 24-inch to 27-inch. This current one that I have right now, which is releasing soon, is starting out with a discount at $16.99. That's with the early bird discount. So original price $18.99. So at $1,900, under $2,000, you know, it is a pretty solid price point, to be honest with you. As a pro, I'm gonna go for it. Okay, because if we do the comparison, the Wacom brand, for the same size as this 27-inch, 4K, same refresh rate, same pressure sensitivity, all the similar features. Actually, the Wacom Pro has less pressure sensitivity. As I'm looking at the website right now, we'll bring it in. Might as well just compare it, you know. So with the Wacom CinTweak the 27 model, I had the 24 touch. We're looking at, you know, 8,192 levels of sensitivity. Okay, we have one stylus use, as you can see here in terms of the packaging, and it's 3,500. Okay, you know, so again here it's like we have the options of it: the 4K display, 120 hertz, you know, 10 millisecond refresh rate, all the elements about, you know, the current sort of feel of things, and yeah, again, looks nice. $3,500. Would I pay for that even as a pro? In comparison to where this is now right now, again, the 24-inch, and this is comparable to the 27 model that I have right now because this is generation 2. This is the 4K. As I said, the 27 model is going to have the 120 hertz refresh rate. Here are some of the specs on the 24 at the moment, because most likely, again, it will be comparable to the 27. Just seeing if there's any other information here we can grab from this. Again, it's 4K display, all that sort of stuff. Pressure levels are 16,384. The 27 model, like I said, is going to be that equalness to it. Let me jump to that side real quickly on my own little notes of information. So again, yeah, it's 27-inch. 16,000 pressure level sensitivity using the latest Pro chip model technology. The X3 Pro chip is what they have in that one. The X3 Pro chip is also inside the 24 model. 4K display, as I mentioned, and then all the stuff I just kind of, you know, labeled out. It's an ultra smooth visual. It's very, very seamless in flow. Pretty much like, you know, what we've been able to see directly on the monitor in terms of response seems to be, you know, solid and strong in terms of response to it. Keeps up with my speed. The monitor itself is nice and clear. Resolution strong. So at $1,800, at original price, $1,900 original cost, at $1,700 for discount, and compare that to $3,500. Again, it's a little bit hard to say that, and I'm being purely honest on my own end. It's like, unless you're looking for the name brand, and would we say that Wacom still kind of holds that name brand? It has the pedigree due to simply of time. These newer brands that have come out, it's not like XPPen is fresh and brand new, like a year or two in. They've been now producing these sort of products for a many number of years. Like I said, I've been aware of them popping up at the shows and conventions, and I've seen other people then start to play with them, and I've been attentive to it. But now that I've actually really played with it, again, as a professional, would I go back to Wacom? At this price point, if I was paying with my own money, most likely not. Simply from the fact that I've used Wacom and their products for my entirety of career, and I know how it feels. Know exactly how it feels in comparison to what I'm using right now with this 27. And the downsides to this item at the moment, as I mentioned earlier, is all it's missing for me is just the ports. Okay, and the remote right now is perfectly comparable. If I'm able to get maybe some attachments of extension, beautiful. That would actually make it a bigger sell for me. But I think this has been super solid at that price. Dare I say, undervalued in actuality. So then as a student, it's like, is this an option? So if I was a student again, and I went back to school, and I was at whatever college, university I went to as an independent student. Now, of course, at the end of the day, the individual has to consider your finances and costs of things. And the other 10 displays they have on here, the price points, let's say if I went just a little bit smaller, I wanted to go for, let's say, the Gen 2 Artist Pro 16 or 19. You're looking at under $500 for the 16-inch version. And if I'm using a laptop and I have a 16-inch drawing display screen or a 19-inch, that's more than enough for me, right? And if I was also as a professional traveling and I wanted something like this, I probably would turn to the 19, honestly. It's probably what I would end up using, because I still like to have a little bit of display space. But then, of course, the 16 is probably a little bit lighter and easier to kind of mobile carry. But either way, it's like price point again, you're looking at a kind of an unbeatable price. So for me, as a student, this would be something that would very much look into, because today, if I was going back to school, a lot of the work I'd be doing, of course, I would still be doing traditional stuff, but it would still incorporate a lot of digital sort of work. In my last year or two into college, as a student, most of my work at the time was digital painting, digital drawing, because I was going to work in the industry that required that sort of standard of digital tools. So I needed to then start to incorporate, this sort of hardware. Now, even as a student back then, you're talking about, the early 2004 or 5 is when I left school. I was using mostly PC at the time. I had a drawing tablet that I was also using from Wacom, and eventually I did end up getting an actual CinTweak. So even though it was a couple $1,000s even back then, which was quite an exorbitant cost, saved for it, obviously built funds towards it, and being able to plan to have something like that for my later years, senior levels as a student, was something I felt like I needed to go for. And of course, as a student in colleges today, you may be able to go out and rent them at their local library. At the college itself, they might have their own sort of hardware there. But if you're an independent student, this is not necessarily a viable option, of course, right? So as an independent, you're gonna have to kind of have your own items. So I would, say saving, your own money and working a little bit and being able to kind of build up to this in maybe like your 3rd year, 4th year in education is kind of the mentality that I will hold. But I would then try to, incorporate this as soon as possible, to be honest with you. And I think that's kind of the way I would approach it now at this point. I think the price, it is very competitive. I think as a student, it does give me the options. The 27 may not be the direct option as a student that I would go for. I might look at some of their older models, but then even then, at $1,700, is this something that I would consider even as a student? Yeah, because again, it's definitely a lot more sort of approachable as a price point in comparison to, let's say, like the $3,500 Wacom CinTweak. And of course, within that particular brand, they may have other options within different sizes as well too. But at that price of $1,700 for the 27, in comparison then to maybe something smaller, I like the real estate space. I like the size. I like the feel. It's the highest and most up-to-date end in terms of processors and resolution, but all the sort of hardware that's in there. So that's kind of the mentality of where I would turn to as to why I would choose something like this at a student level as well too. And this is again me talking about, like, if I went back to school, this is essentially what I would do. In my classes, I tend to talk a lot about like educational pathways and what kind of classes to take and what schools to go for. And this day and age, the idea of independent learning is one of the biggest components of the driving factor of education. College and stuff like this is still out there, but people are starting to find out that there are other ways to learn art skill sets and not having to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for a college education. You can get the same sort of information and sort of skill set out of these online courses as well. But the mixture of these sort of experiences are kind of critical. But as you get to the independent route, using something like this is going to be needed pretty sort of like into the mix of your educational pathway right from either the get-go or about halfway in. So again, 27, I would recommend. It's something at this point, from the price, from the actual feel of it, the options of being able to attach a sort of a monitor mount with an arm with various sort of brands and price points. It's going to be cheaper than the one from the Wacom arm. It is also another great option. So beyond that, this has pretty much been a very, very solid sort of performance, I would say, within this. I'm not fully surprised, but I am satisfied based on that. And I'm glad that actually this has been sort of the feel of the product for me, because I almost kind of even expected a complete night and day transition, where like this is a giant upgrade and it's going to be this revolution of a product, but actually it really wasn't. But at the same time, I actually don't mind that, because the smoothness of transition from a product I've been using my entire life pretty much, jumping into something like this didn't require strain or stress. And so being able to easily move into this, but also having this sort of comfort by knowing that I didn't pay as much for it, it's something that can be a relief for people that might be turning to things of this type of digital hardware and products. Okay, so now that we got into some of those details, you kind of have a good feel, I hope, as to my general reaction and thoughts behind this particular item and piece of hardware, and so far it's been very favorable for me. There are a couple of small little gripes, and kind of give you guys a general gist of everything. The XPPen Artist Pro 27-inch Generation 2 4K monitor has been a relatively solid performer for me, I would say. And other than that, the small tidbits of not really having USB ports is one of the downsides to it, something that may be able to have inclusions to in the future models down the line. The remote has been a good surprise for me. It took a minute to kind of get used to, but I've been able to adapt to it fairly well. I do wish for some modularity for extensions, for adding more keys at some point as well too. The monitor itself is fantastic. Everything in terms of color, brightness, control to the software seems really stable. The styluses have been really good. Was very surprised by the new slim version as well too. I like this one quite a bit. For my everyday sort of use within classes and work, daily feed, this is pretty much going to be my permanent sort of display for the time being. I would recommend this, to people that are looking for things that are approaching to digital for the first time. Even as students, I think the XPPen model does offer a very competitive price. And for the qualitative competition based on my use of the other brands for such a long period of time, I would say this is a very, very great direction of things that, because competition is important, it really helps up the bar in terms of quality level things, but also introduces, products that challenge the landscape in terms of artists and what they need, and really give people, and again, various options to go down, and more chances that people who can't afford much higher price endpoints to be able to turn to something that is almost pretty much equal to, qualitative wise, build wise, hardware wise, to the other ones that are out there. So XPPen 27, I give a thumbs up, and I would recommend. If there's any sort of updates I'll do down the line after maybe, I don't know, a couple weeks to months of use, I may do another quick update on that in terms of how it's faring, especially what I'm more kind of interested in is just generally how the software sort of handles it. Does it drop out? You know, does it glitch? Is it buggy at all? General display sort of feel as well too. Is there any sort of dead pixels or something like this? Nothing so far right now at the seams, and I'm pretty confident with the actual build quality of this thing. So beyond that, thank you guys for joining in, and I hope you guys were able to get some good information off of my experience of using this and going into some details about my, response and feel towards this item. If you guys are interested in seeing more of these sort of videos, put a comment down below of different sort of things you'd like to be able to see. Obviously, I've done a lot of pen reviews, and I've done even things like sketchbooks and stuff like that as well, sketchbook tours, and demos and live Q&As. But these sort of items, if you guys would like to have more on the digital side, please inform me, and I'll look for some other options down the line and talk about that as much in depth as possible. Other than that, if there are any questions, things I may have missed, things you guys want to be able to drop in as additional facts or information, also your experiences behind XPPen, the brand, and these sort of different devices, please let us know below. And I'd like to be able to kind of get a general sense of the feel of the landscape within our artist community. So again, thank you guys. I'll see you all next time for an updated another review. Look forward to it. Subscribe, comment down below as I said, and we'll catch you next time. Keep drawing.